I'll be buried in my grave before I become a slave, yeah. That is what I heard them say way back in the day. I'll be buried in my grave before I become a slave, yeah, yeah, yeah. But it seems like since that day, yeah, yeah, we have sorely changed. Eh, eh, see, I'll be buried in my grave before I become a slave, yeah, yeah. That is what I heard them say, yeah, way back in the day. I'll be buried in my grave, yeah, before I become a slave, yeah, yeah, yeah. But it seems like since that day, yeah, we have sorely changed. Whoa. Eh, eh. Whoa, oh, 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 oh. Whoa, oh, 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 oh.
And now, live from beautiful Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, you're watching My Fellow Americans with your host, Spike Collins.
Welcome to the show. Welcome. Thank you. Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. Oh, thank you so much. Welcome to the show. It's going to be a great show. Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm clapping for you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Welcome to My Fellow Americans. I am literally Spike Cohen. I am so happy to have you here with me today, Spike Cohen. Today, Wednesday, the 6th of March. I can't believe it's already March. I'm so happy to have you here. This is a Muddied Waters Media production. Check us out on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, SoundCloud, Twitter, iTunes, Stitcher. We're on Periscope. We're on a couple other things that I can't remember at the moment. Be sure to check us out. Be sure to like and share this video. I want you to share this video now. Turn to your neighbor and say, neighbor, I want you to watch this live anarchist agitprop podcast with me that's going to last about an hour. They'll be so happy you did that. Be sure to share the gift of me, Spike Cohen. Today, kids love it. I'd like to thank Kroger for this delicious, purified drinking water that I drink on this and every episode of My Fellow Americans. Blue Vanaka. The intro and outro music that I play on this and every episode of My Fellow Americans comes from the amazing and talented Mr. Joe Davi. That is Jodavi. Check him out on Facebook, SoundCloud. Go to his Bandcamp. Buy all of his music on Bandcamp. You'll be so happy you did. Thank you, Mr. Joe Davi. Shout out to Tehran Turks' mom and him, as always. Guys, my guest tonight is someone who I think will be a household name soon enough, and that's why I, consummate opportunist that I am getting my hooks in on his coattails early. He has quite a resume already. He was the founder and president of the Young Americans for Liberty chapter at his university, Drake University. He was the acting chairman of the House Liberty Caucus affiliate in Iowa. He is now a contributor for Being Libertarian. He is also the co-author of Igniting Liberty, Voices for Freedom Around the World. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to My Fellow Americans, Mr. Jake Dorsch. Jake, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me on. I'm trying to work on being a household name, not quite there yet. I'm also not the podcast host of My Fellow Americans, but I'm working there.
We can't all be the podcast host of My Fellow Americans, but you're definitely you're doing a good job. I'm very happy to have you on. And guys, when Mohammed Shaker introduced us and I read your book, I knew immediately that I wanted to have you on. So thanks for fitting us in. I'm really happy to have you.
Yeah, thank you. I know Mohammed very well.
Cool. Yeah, and guys, be sure to comment with your questions and thoughts. And Jake and I will tell you if you are right or wrong. Now, Jake, the first thing I ask any new guest when they're on my show for the first time is how you. Now, we know you're a libertarian, so usually I ask how you would describe your political beliefs. We already know you're a libertarian, but how would you say you came to your beliefs? Would you say that it was kind of an aha moment or more of an evolution over time? Talk to us about that.
Yeah, that's absolutely kind of a tough question to answer. I think that I kind of grew up as a Republican, as a conservative Republican, but I also had these views that essentially I believe that if there's a problem that needs to be fixed, we need the government to do it. So
Right.
if we have a problem with, say drugs, or say we have a problem with a foreign power we're going to go take care of, or say if we have an economic crisis, we need to have government fix that problem. So
Right.
at the same time that I had these conservative views on social policy, I also had these kind of socialist Keynesian views on economic policy. And it wasn't until I started hearing Rand Paul, who was not a true libertarian by any means. I like him, but I don't think that either of us really consider him a true libertarian or really a purist. But
Ron Paul Light, yeah.
Yeah, right. So from hearing from Rand Paul, but also anarcho-capitalist Eric July, who shares beliefs similar to yours, I started to kind of question these views that maybe the free market can fix these problems, and maybe that freedom is the answer over government wrongdoing and basically the state taking control of everything.
Right. And so that brought you into college, and I guess you started. So you went to Drake, and I guess they didn't already have a libertarian presence there.
Nope, they did not. Not much.
And so what is the by the way, what's the because I've had people on that have been involved with their chapter of Young Americans for Liberty. What exactly is involved there? Do you have to actually like petition to your, I guess, student government or whatever to be allowed to be on campus, or how does that work?
Yeah, student government at universities honestly is just as inefficient as like the federal government. I put my petition in September. Of like the first semester I got out of college, put my petition in there to create an organization. We of course are nationally recognized. We have several hundred chapters,
Right.
And also had like 25 members right away. And I was not actually a recognized student organization until March. So that meant that I had 7 months of talking to senators, talking to people within the university, trying to actually get through the process. I did not even get a Senate hearing until like March 2nd, March 3rd, something like that. So I had to wait 7 months just to get a hearing to become an organization, and then I could actually start officially planning club meetings and stuff like that. So these liberal universities don't make it easy for you to start organizations.
Now, was that because, or maybe, but was it because they're just that inefficient, or was it because of a bias against what you were trying to do, or like a combination of both?
Probably a combination of both, but I think in Drake's case, it's more so just overall inefficiency. I think that once I actually got out to the Senate floor, mostly registered Democrats ended up voting for it, and I really respect that decision because students, at least the ones that voted there, are obviously pro free speech and they are in favor of being expressed on campus. They don't really agree with. So I think in my case, it was mostly inefficiency, but I know that other universities, especially places like Berkeley, it's more so the opposite.
Oh yeah, they fight hard against that kind of stuff. So then that gets you. Because you have, as I mentioned in your intro, you've been building quite a resume at a young age. You're 41, right?
a little older. I'm actually 65. I self-identify as 65-year-old, so I can collect social.
So you start getting Medicare right now. I think you're one year off from Medicare. So then you end up, you're the House Liberty Caucus affiliate, and is that so? That's the Republican House Liberty Caucus?
I'm actually not running that anymore, but I was involved in getting that charter in the state of Iowa. Yes.
Very cool. And you're in Wisconsin, correct?
No. I was in Wisconsin. That's where I grew up, and I currently go to school in Iowa. That's where Drake is. There's
okay.
A lot of confusion. I get it.
No problem. So okay, cool. So then that gets us to this book that you helped co-write, Igniting Liberty: Voices for Freedom Around the World. Tell us about. I told you I was going to at least read your chapters. I ended up reading the whole thing over the weekend. It's a really, really good read, guys. By the way, check it out. It is, if you have an Amazon, if you have a Kindle Unlimited account, it's a free download. If not, it's $5.99 to download. You will be very, very happy that you got it. Be sure it's in the link is in the show notes. Be sure to check that out. But tell us about the book, how it came about, and what you guys wanted to accomplish with it.
Yeah, several different authors on Being Libertarian. It's a big Facebook page. I'm sure most of your listeners have heard of it.
Oh,
It
I'm
has
sure.
over 70,000 Facebook likes right now.
Mhm.
A lot of them want to write basically a political manifesto for libertarianism. There's books out there such as What is Conservatism, which was written in 1950s, 1960s, that kind of puts together the overall tenets of conservatism. We
Right.
obviously have a manifesto if you want to put that in the trash bin. And we, of course, wanted to make our own version of that. So several libertarian authors got together, decided to kind of combine several different ideas into one. The first time we tried it, didn't really work out. People were really putting the effort in. We had to reboot it again, and then about 5 to 10 authors got together. We all, took in certain sections of the book. We all wrote different chapters, different topics. Larry Sharp was actually willing to do our foreword, and yeah, we ended up obviously publishing a book that incorporates a lot of different ideas, a lot of different authors, and touches base on about 20, 25 different libertarian ideas and issues.
Yeah, it was really good. And what I liked about it was there seemed to be kind of a mix of philosophy and the brass tacks of it, So because what happens is people will say, and I experience this as an anarchist. People say, well, what is it you believe, with libertarianism or with anarchy or whatever else? And you'll tell them, and then their immediate next question is, well, but how would, unfortunately, it's stuff like who would build who would pave the roads or whatever, who would build my roads. But it comes down to, well, how would that actually work? And so there seemed to be kind of a good mix of the philosophical underpinnings for it as well as how it actually works. Now, your contributions to Igniting Liberty were about gun rights, drugs, free trade, and monetary policy. Is that correct?
Very good.
Right. Thank you. And so, gun rights is something we talk about a lot on this show. So I always like to get my guest perspectives on that. Tell us about, first of all, when I read your sections, I expected you to write mostly about libertarian philosophy on these different subjects, and you did touch on that somewhat, as did some of the other co-authors, of course. But I was impressed with the tack that you took of diving very deeply into a countless number of stats to essentially explain why the facts have proven libertarianism to be correct. And I assume that was an intentional strategy.
Yeah, it absolutely was. I think that there's enough people that are kind of pushing the idea that the Second Amendment is something we ought to protect, that we have to have some kind of fundamental rights to protect ourselves.
Right.
The problem is that a lot of these emotions from the left wing that wants to take away gun rights is a lot of it is fueled by false narratives that are driven by statistics and empirical data.
Right.
Once you actually pour through the information, you realize that there's not a whole lot of evidence actually protecting the idea that we should, start universal background check, start taking away the rights of many Americans. There's several studies on there that I cited. One of them is the fact that the University of Pittsburgh did a study of all the homicides in Pittsburgh and found that 81% of the guns found in violent crimes were actually not legally owned by the person that used it. So, the legal gun owners, people like maybe yourself if you own a gun, or people that actually push this gun agenda, aren't the people that actually committing homicides, aren't the people that are committing mass shootings.
Right.
The big problem is the black market. The big problem is because we have crime in the United States. That's the problem.
Right, of course, and there's that cliche that if you outlaw guns, only outlaws will have guns, and it's true. I mean, if you say, and this is true of anything, when you create a black market, when you ban or greatly restrict something, and you say, okay, you can't do it or else you're a criminal, you invite the criminal element to those things. So now you have a situation where the only people who have guns are either the government or criminals. And those are the two groups that are the most likely to actually harm innocent people. So that's not a good policy. But it was interesting because your chapters had bibliographies that took up an entire page at sometimes. It was very well researched and sourced. But talk to us a little about, and I think these two kind of work together, trade and monetary policy. It's usually from the left that we hear bad things about, we hear anti-libertarian things about guns. Not always. There are times the right does it as well, but usually it's from the left. And usually when we talk about, for example, drugs, decriminalizing or legalizing drugs, most of the anti-libertarian talk about that comes from the right. Not always, but usually. With trade and monetary policy, these are things that you hear almost equal amounts of anti-libertarian, anti-freedom stuff from both the authoritarian left and the authoritarian right. And then when it comes to monetary policy, the vast majority of people really don't even understand that. So talk to me about your thoughts on trade and sound money.
Yeah, so I'll talk about trade for a little bit. I guess in theory, you have factions of both the left wing and also the right wing that support and are also against free trade. So we kind of have allies and enemies on both sides.
Right.
On the left, people that are usually for free trade are usually the kind of like the peace stuff foreign policy folks that believe that free trade it kind of is invites some kind of togetherness in the international community, and that if we have free trade with Mexico, it's going to make for better relations with Mexico. And then the ones on the left that generally disagree with free trade have the false belief that free trade suppresses the wages of workers and makes it harder for basically the blue-collar working class people of all countries to earn a living. On the right wing, it's usually a little different. The people that are against free trade, the Trumpers and whatnot, essentially believe that foreign powers take advantage of the United States through free trade. So places like China, places like Europe, places like Mexico take advantage of the United States when they sign free trade deals with us. And then, of course, the ones that are on the right that are for free trade generally are more free market. At least they try and advertise themselves as free market folks. But it's interesting because it really divides both sides. And that's because neither side really has a consistent ideology because they obviously make in both of them.
Right. Well, that's kind of a standard thing with the left and right is that it's very easy. I say that the left and right are the most correct when they're exposing the hypocrisy of the other side, which is very easy to do because, like you said, they don't have a consistent ideology. So it's based on a mix of what politicians on their side are saying, which is usually influenced by whatever lobbying groups have the most power in that party. So it's not a consistent message. A combination of that and just their own personal fears and innate feelings about stuff as opposed to like any kind of praxis about how they actually got to how they think about something. Like Thomas Sowell would say, they're not thinking, they're feeling. So with trade, it seems like both kind of come from a sort of zero-sum way of thinking about things, where it's like if this country is benefiting or the people living in this country are benefiting from this trade, it must mean that we are losing out. And obviously that's easy so if I'm a factory worker and I lose my job at a whatever type of factory and it's going overseas, I'm obviously going to be harder to convince than the average person that in the long run is good for me, right? Like it's a difficult thing. But overall, most people aren't directly affected by that. So they're going from politicians and pundits and speakers telling them this zero-sum lie that these jobs are being lost, we're not benefiting, the pie is fixed and they're taking more of the pie, we need to fight for our pie. What did the data show you in terms of like job losses and wage growth or loss and things like that when it actually came to free trade versus protectionism?
Yeah, the most moderate estimates from the NAFTA years. There's an analyst from 1994-1999, the first 5 years of NAFTA, found that the most moderate estimates found roughly a 5 to 6 million net job growth. That means if you take the jobs that were gained because of free trade, detract the ones that are lost because of free trade, that's about 5 or 6 million jobs net after that. Not only that, but the unemployment rate was actually very low throughout the 1990s, and even more, even larger estimates show that it might even larger than 6 million people that gained jobs in the 1990s just as a result of NAFTA and CAFTA. Another book, if you ever read the author Charles Whelan, he essentially did analysis saying that, yes, about 37,000 Americans lost jobs every single year after NAFTA was created due to obviously things being outsourced overseas. But during that same exact time period, about 200,000 people would be gaining jobs every single month, not year, but month. So, if you actually look through the data, the most moderate estimates say that about 5-6 million people got jobs over the people that lost jobs as a result. The fundamental problem is very few people notice that they gained a job because of free trade. Anyone can kind of lose a job and start pointing fingers and say that, oh, it's Mexico, it's Canada, it's China, it's India, it's Japan. I just lost my job because of some foreigner. But it's very difficult to say that this new plant opened in my hometown that just gave me a really well-paying job that usually pays better than the rest of the rest of the jobs in this country is because a foreign company moved here and started opening up jobs to locals, or it's because a pre-existing American company that started selling overseas and started seeing revenue skyrocket opened another facility in my city. Now they're giving me a job. So it's really hard to point to free trade from an individual level as a reason for getting a job. It's very easy to point to it as a scapegoat for losing yours.
Right. It's obviously, like I said, this person lost their job. This factory moved to China, Mexico, Vietnam, Canada, wherever. That intrinsically, you don't have to explain that. People get that happened, and then it's very easy to tie that to free trade or just just trade in general. Whereas, like you said, trying to get people into the weeds of very rarely do you hear, well, or not, I shouldn't say very rarely. It's easier to say, for example, if a European automaker brings a factory here, or if a Japanese company brings a factory here, that is equally easy to tie to free trade and say, see, we're getting jobs as a result of it. But that's not how the vast majority of jobs are created with trade. Like you said, it's created through greater, basically greater profit for companies, allowing them to create more jobs. There is some of that importation of jobs as well, but that's not where the bulk of it comes from. So it's hard to convert someone on that. Especially if they're still raw and angry from them or a close loved one losing a job because of trade. Putting aside the fact, obviously, that that company more than likely would have just gone, a lot of times would have just gone out of business because they can't compete. So their job was already in jeopardy. It was just a matter of whether someone else was able to get it or whether that company just ceased to exist and some other company propped up, which would effectively be the same thing. Talk to me about monetary policy. That's actually, surprisingly, on an anarchist podcast that's on its 33rd episode, you would think that we would have hours and hours of talk about monetary policy. And we have some, not nearly the 33 hours you would expect. Talk to me about what the data showed you when it came to monetary policy and what you took away from that.
Yeah, I guess my specific chapter wasn't so much just analysis of monetary policy. It was very much looking at the 2008 recession we had and the 1992 Great Depression we had. So it wasn't looking at the years between so much. It was mostly at what caused those two events to occur and what prolonged those events from happening for even longer. So I'll start with the Great Depression, if that's okay. The Great Depression, there's this really big myth that President Herbert Hoover didn't do anything for basically 4 or 5 years. Essentially, the common belief is that a free market Republican came into office, being Herbert Hoover, who was very unliked and didn't really do anything when the market kind of collapsed on Black Tuesday, and that's why I think it essentially got worse. That's one of the largest false scenarios around 1929 Great Depression there actually is. First off, he actually began, this will actually intertwine free trade a little bit. The smoot-hawley tariff was passed in 1930. That is the largest tariff the United States has ever passed. Right. And even though the intention of that trade deal, or sorry, not trade, the tariff, was to actually increase revenues, the tariff revenues fell by 49% over just 5-6 years. So the one purpose that tariffs had, it didn't even do. Not only that, we also quadrupled the lowest income tax rate and raised the highest tax rate from 25% to 63%. And during that 5-year time period, we saw that income tax revenues fell by 48%. So all math, but just those two policies alone allowed for the economy to worsen than what it already was. That's why the unemployment rate is 25% before he left office. And not only that, we also limited immigration. Immigration fell by 90% during the Herbert Hoover era because of different policies he passed. So those are some things that prolonged the recession. I'll say the greatest thing that caused the Great Depression was likely because the Federal Reserve decided to increase monetary policy by about 62% between 1921 and 1929. However, the actual amount of money, like physical monetary capital on the open market, only increased by about 1% during that time. That meant that all these banks and financial institutions, which were also taking advantage of the fact that the interest rate on government loans is also very low, they will be taking loans from both the government because the interest rate was so low, and then they would also be giving out money left and right because they increased the supply so much thanks to the Federal Reserve, that when all these loans are dispersed out to the general population and the economy started to have some difficulty, it would have been a minor recession if it wasn't for this, but people couldn't pay it back because there wasn't enough cash in the open market. all the assets, and the entire economy were basically stuffed away in loans that couldn't be liquidated, and that's why they couldn't pay people back. And then people didn't have spending money; they couldn't spend it on businesses. Then businesses collapsed, and more people are employed. So the entire situation basically spiraled out of control, and that's why it went on for so long.
So, and kind of not exactly the same, but kind of a similar effect then in 2008. But before we get to that, the with the Depression, so like you said, I have people when I say, libertarianism, that, everything from, I guess, what you would be kind of a minarchist, a minimal government that just does the most basic things, I guess, either that are bound in the Constitution or just in protecting natural rights and kind of protecting and enforcing private property rights, all the way to someone like me who thinks that government is a violation of private property rights and therefore should not even exist. But that, a very libertarian, laissez-faire society, and they'll say, oh, you mean like what caused the Depression? And you have to sort of unpack for them how it was actually a combination of, like you said, bad protectionist, nativist policies. We got to keep out these foreigners and their money, and a combination of that with their money and their products and everything else. We got to keep them out, and then also bad central banking policies from the Federal Reserve, which it's what 98%. The dollar has lost 98%. It's worth 2 cents on the dollar from when the Federal Reserve was introduced, I think.
I thought it was 95, but something like that.
Yeah, it's
to 99.
Yeah, the U.S. dollar, the Federal Reserve note, is worth pennies on the dollar, 2 cents, 5 cents, whatever, than what it was once worth at one point. So my camera went out.
Yeah, I noticed that it kind of froze up a little bit.
There we go. Hey, everybody. That's interesting. I've had other people's video go out, but not my own. Okay, cool. So yeah, all those things can kind of combine into a perfect storm and make what should have been just sort of a hiccup of a recession, which itself was caused by bad government policy, into this horrific thing that made everything worse. In 2008, there were similar things, but not so much with the immigration, but also bad government and monetary policy as well. Talk to us about that.
Yeah. Well, kind of, as I mentioned before, the interest rate during the 1920s was much lower than what the market rate was, and that's because the federal funds rate, which is set by the Federal Reserve, was lower than that, which allowed for banks and financial institutions to invest and basically take money out from the government. Now, in the 1920s, that was much similar. We saw the interest rate drop from 5.5% to about 1%. Within only a 2-year period under Alan Greenspan. So
right.
That was a similar situation there that kind of caused the Great Recession in 2008. However, there's also this fallacy going around, this belief that it was also caused by deregulation and the elimination of Glass-Steagall in 1999. And that's also very untrue as well. There's a number of different policies I noted in the book, different laws that are passed. This one in 1992 was passed by Henry Gonzalez in the House, that caused some big problems, and that was because the law itself forced it actually was not Federal Reserve related at all. It was actually related to housing urban development, and the HUD director was forced to give out through government through GSEs, which GSEs of course are government-sponsored enterprises, was forced to give out money to low-income people, and 30% of the loans that the HUD director was giving out were supposed to go to Americans that would not really qualify for a loan, Americans that don't have to show proof of income. And these were, of course, given out by GSEs, not so much places like Wells Fargo, not so much Chase Bank. It was given out by government-sponsored enterprises. So the government forced the HUD director to give up minimum of 30% of his loans to low-income people. And the reason why the housing crisis was created, of course, is because a lot of these people that couldn't really afford these houses were given federally backed loans, and then we defaulted on them. The government also had an issue, and the entire free market was kind of thrown in lapse. So the idea that the housing market was problematic during the 1920s isn't false. However, the reason why that happened definitely is because the free market's not responsible. And another thing to note about Glass-Steagall specifically is that if Glass-Steagall was still around, it would prevent a lot of the mergers that happened after 2008, after 2009, that actually kind of allowed for the swift recovery after the recession. So places like, obviously Lehman Brothers went bankrupts, but smaller investment firms not be able to be bought out by the larger companies above them.
Right. So we've got, and it was called, was it the Community Reinvestment Act? Isn't that what it was called? Clinton's? Yeah. So,
Yep.
right. So in the 1990s, Bill Clinton, and I think it was a Republican-controlled Congress. So this isn't, blame one side or the other. The government decided to pass a series of a law which essentially to try to spur on home ownership. And what they did, like Jake was just talking about, they were basically giving away loans to people that probably who wouldn't have qualified otherwise, which sounds great, but it's kind of like a housing Ponzi scheme. You're getting people into the housing market that wouldn't have otherwise been able to. You're driving up the cost of housing, which can only be affordable to people by having interest rates and mortgage rates very, very low and very, very accessible. And someone's going to be stuck with that, at the top of that price apex when the whole thing falls apart. And that's what happened. And of course, it was the taxpayer that was on the hook because, with the TARP and TARP Act and all of those things that, gave money, basically bailed out all the banks and financial institutions and insurance companies that were involved. I was actually I jumped into real estate very briefly during the last couple of years of that housing boom because it was just so easy to make money, especially in my area in Myrtle Beach. And I routinely met with people who had zero plan to pay their first mortgage loan, much less the next, 29 years and 11 months of mortgage payments. They would get these, they were called ninja loans. I'm sure you heard about this in your research. Ninja loans, no income, no job or asset verification. You literally just said, they would, I think, pull a credit check just to see what your credit score was, but they only use that mildly. And you pretty much said, I'm worth this much, I make this much money, I really super promise that I make this much, and they wouldn't verify it. Sometimes they wouldn't even ask, and they would give you loans for as much as whatever the maximum is for a jumbo loan. I think it was $460,000 or $480,000 back in the day. And so people were buying, up to and including $500,000 homes with zero, not just maybe their credit was okay, but they couldn't show that they could afford it. They couldn't even show that they didn't even have to show that they had a job. They had no plan to be able to make the payments, and they very often would be foreclosed on within a few months. The banks were okay with this while prices continued to skyrocket because they just foreclose on that person and sell it on the market and make more than what the loan was for. But the problem with that is that, again, it's going to fail. That's not a problem of the free market because the free market would have never underwritten such a thing without the government behind them forcing them to do it and promising to bail them out if the whole thing fell apart. Am I wrong in my assessment there?
No, you're absolutely right. These were by Freddie Mae and all those GSEs that were lending irresponsibly. It wasn't so much the big banks like Wells Fargo and Chase. Those didn't even go bankrupt, or those didn't really take much of a hit. It was mostly because of the government that was giving out loans irresponsibly, and that's why the problems were created.
Right. One of our commenters, one of our viewers, Jacob LaBelle, says, "Where's my TARP money?" It's keep checking the mail. It is on its way, I promise you. We will definitely, right after the show ends, we'll get on top of your TARP loan. So okay, cool. So I want to talk about drugs. We talk about drugs. We actually don't talk about drugs a lot on this show. I'm actually, so for those who don't know, I'm a recovering addict. I have been clean for 13 years now. 12 years, 13 years. Quite a while, over a decade. But the fact that I'm not able to just recreationally enjoy drugs doesn't mean that I should be able to stop someone else from doing it, and it certainly doesn't mean that we should be, that I want to, or that we should be, putting people in cages as a result of this. You got quite a bit into this with drugs, and you talked a lot about Portugal, and I've read a little bit, or I've heard a little bit about what Portugal did, but I didn't know all the details. But Portugal had a very dramatic change in problems they were having with drugs by changing their policy, which you looked into. Tell us about what you found out when you researched that.
Yeah, two of the big case studies I did were in Portugal and Switzerland, because both of which were very conservative for many years
Right.
and were very skeptical of legalizing drugs to take care of their drug addict problem, and both of them kind of fixed it. Portugal saw that their revenues from just taxing marijuana after legalizing it were, more than double the amount of money they needed just to rehabilitate people that were suffering from drug usage. In Switzerland and Zurich, Switzerland, that was actually the most prominent example I used, in my opinion. That was because the mayor of Zurich, Switzerland, decided to actually give out free needles that people used for heroin. Now, of course, at first that sounds absolutely ludicrous. I mean, it's
Sounds
still
insane. Right, right, right.
but most of the drug deaths that we see in the United States and throughout the world aren't because of the actual drug itself. A lot of times it's because when the drugs are passed around the black market, they are improperly given around. There's a lot of health issues as well.
Right.
Marijuana's never killed anyone, but there's a lot of marijuana-related deaths because you'll find marijuana laced with rat poison or laced with something like that will
Right.
kill 10 people across multiple states. I mentioned that as well. Um, and in Switzerland specifically, they saw that just by giving this out, just by legalizing and decriminalizing a lot of these drugs, and just by taxing them and allowing for themselves to pay for rehabilitation, allowing for the people to have these individual rights rather than try and cage them up and lock them away for 20 years, led to not just an economic recovery, but also a recovery of most of the addicts. A lot of these parks were cleaned up that were usually full of heroin addicts left and right, night and day. And that's because a lot of the deaths, a lot of the health issues they had previously were kind of fixed by this. Now, I'm not really on board with the idea of giving out free meals by the government. I'm not really on
Yeah.
board with that quite yet. I think it's a little crazy for me, but obviously it's better than the alternative, which is a long, hard fought drug war that cost the United States $1 trillion over only 5 decades. So not saying it's necessarily the best solution to deal with that, but it's obviously much better than a very expensive and very heartbreaking alternative.
Right. And people dying of preventable or communicable illness entirely because they're using dirty needles and all of that. It's interesting that you mentioned.
Yeah,
So
doctor either.
go ahead.
Well, I say they can't get a doctor either. Medical amnesty is not on the table for many people that suffer from drug usage. They can't just go to a doctor and say, doc, you help me out. I overdosed on cocaine. They just die. We
Right.
can't help these people because obviously, if you admit to something like that in those states, you could still go to jail for several decades, depending on the situation.
All right. Yeah, and that's. I hope everyone can agree that that is absurd. You mentioned, it's not. And again, I'm an anarchist. I don't think government should be doing anything. Obviously, we don't want government, taxing us, robbing us to pay for people to have needles. But here's what happened. Here's what brings us to that. So, for example, in Arizona, for many years, people were pushing for needle sharing, but actually like private needle sharing, like basically allowing people, even if you didn't legalize heroin, legalizing giving people needles in order for them to be able to use these drugs that they shoot safely, or as safely as you can shoot a drug into your veins. And the government said, no, absolutely not. You're aiding and abetting, criminal activity, and we'll treat you very harshly if you try to do it. And this is where there's an anarchist philosophical thing called prefiguration. And so it's the idea of answering the question of, without government, who would do X, by showing them who would do it, us. And so you started having these people who were illegally giving out needles to addicts, and they saw a rapid decline in the spread of the illnesses. You saw less hospital visits. You saw less deaths overall and less illness. And so it was a positive thing. You saw less dirty needles all over the street, because part of it was, bring us your dirty needles and we will exchange them for clean needles. So it was not just to clean up the actual drug use, but to actually clean up the streets too. And a lot of people were thrown in jail for it. A lot of people faced trial for it. And what ended up happening was, it reached a point where it was proven to be such a good success that you had erstwhile conservative anti-drug politicians saying, okay, well, we'll at least legalize it. We'll let we'll at least legalize the needle sharing. And so now needle sharing is a very big thing in Arizona now. It's now legal, or at least decriminalized. I don't know if it's legal, but they let them do it. So I think it's decriminalized. But so that's a perfect example where you don't have to have government do it. Government could just get out of the way and let the market do it, because we all have an interest in having streets that don't have needles all over them or dead people all over them. So if someone said to me, hey, would you like to donate $5 or $10 to help, us keep our streets cleaner and safer? Yeah, I'll probably do that. And that's really all it would take. It's not an incredibly expensive thing. So that's very interesting that they did that. It is looking increasingly, at least with marijuana, like you have a Republican president saying he'll sign legalization. So I think we're pretty close to that. And I think it'll be, so I guess I'll get your thoughts on this. Assuming that we're going to have legalization or decriminalization of marijuana in the next few years, how long do you think it's going to take that same line of thought to go from, it took 80 years to go from alcohol to marijuana? How long from, weed to the harder drugs, the drugs people have actually died from, do you think it'll take for that, the common thought to be like, well, I'm against using it, but it should at least be legal? How long do you think that'll take?
For legalization or decriminalization, because there is a difference. Legalization says you can go outside and store an entire line of cocaine off a trash can. Decriminalization says you can still do it. You just have to be careful about how you do it, because even though it's not technically legal, the government can still seize what you have, or there can still be some kind of societal repercussions. So there's a little bit of a difference between the two.
Well, let's say decriminalization then. I guess just the idea that we're not going to put people in cages for using something.
Okay. Yeah, I'll say decriminalization could happen within 10, 20 years. I guess with legalization, it's really hard to tell.
Right.
I think that outside the very far left, there aren't many people that are on board with full-blown legalized meth and full-blown legalized cocaine. And I'm not so sure if I'm for it, to be honest. I think I'm mostly for decriminalization of really hard drugs, not so much legalization of it. I think that there should be some kind of way in the middle between the two. And of course, that might be where we kind of have minor differences between us, is that I'm a libertarian by empirical data and by not so much ideas, and more so because of what real world examples give me, whereas you're a anarcho-capitalist mostly by purity, I'm kind of guessing. So
a combination of the two, yeah.
Right. So I guess we do disagree a little bit. I'm not so sure that legalization will ever happen with cocaine and meth. I think that decriminalization might, but legalization, I think, is pretty far off yet.
It's a tough one, right? Because now, so all of the it's a lot easier to argue for weed. No one's ever died from it. It has a lot of medicinal properties. There are, it's a much better and safer alternative pain relief drug than, for example, all these synthetic opioids or organic opioids like opium or heroin. I'm not sure if heroin's considered organic, but non-synthesized drugs. It's easy to sell weed. First of all, most of us have tried it and don't necessarily have bad experiences with using it, maybe with the law or whatever, but so it's an easy sell. Meth, not so much. I will give you that. Meth is a tough, when people say to me, like, do you really want cocaine to be legal? And I'll say, it's less that I want it to be legal or that I want people to, do I want people to do cocaine? No, I don't want people to eat too many carbs. I mean, there's a lot of things I don't want people to do because it's unhealthy, but I don't see the interest in putting someone in a cage as a result of it. So whether it's decriminalization or legalization or whatever else, another thing that I'm not a fan of with legalization is that it usually comes with very heavy regulation and taxation. You, from the empirical data angle, probably would say, that's more of a positive thing because that's a source of revenue and so forth. Me, from a philosophical standpoint, sees that as one drug cartel being replaced with another one that's more centralized in power. But regardless, I mean, I don't think, I think we have a long way. Talking with Larry Sharp last week, he said, he comes to these libertarian groups and we're talking about abolishing public education and legalizing everything. And he's like, the general public is so far away from what you guys are entertaining, it's not even worth talking about it with them. If you go to someone who's, their kids in school and the school's not doing well and, all they're hearing is that the school just needs more money, and you go to them and go, no, that school should be abolished and it should be legal for your kid to do cocaine. Like, you're not coming to them with something that they can relate to. You're just scaring them. So I get that. So let's see here. Oh, that was something I wanted to ask you about. So on your chapter on gun control, you wrote, it was an interesting statement you wrote. You said, I chose not to make a natural rights argument because I don't believe the Constitution or the Bill of Rights are impeccable or sacred documents. And then you went on to talk about how, for example, in the Seventh Amendment, it references anything over $20, and it doesn't address inflation in that figure. That, obviously that $20 is going to be worth less over time. Obviously, slavery wasn't properly addressed in the founding documents and things like that you talked about. I definitely agree with you on your assertion regarding the founding documents. And in fact, I come from the Lysander Spooner school of kids who don't recognize authority good. But my question to you is, something I didn't understand with that. Were you saying, do you believe that the argument for natural rights is equally shaky, or were you just saying that was an argument you wish to avoid in favor of just explaining the data on why gun control doesn't work?
My stance is that the Second Amendment should exist, much like the First Amendment. However, what my point was, maybe I didn't make it super clear, is that we can't just lay back on, the Constitution says this, therefore we have to do it.
Right.
Because there are flaws within the Constitution. It was written by humans. It was not written by some God, if you believe in God, or some larger entity. We made mistakes.
Right.
Amendment 7 obviously didn't count for inflation. They said that if you can't pay $20 for a lawyer, you get one from the state. And $20, in 1770s might mean something, but $20 now is nothing.
$20 lawyer now. I wouldn't want to be represented by a $20 lawyer now, I can tell you that.
I wouldn't either. So I believe that there should be a constitutional amendment for gun rights. I believe there should be somewhere in the Constitution or in laws that obviously says, any U.S. citizen should be allowed to carry a firearm for personal protection. However, I would lean back on this idea that because the Constitution says something, we have to automatically believe it, and we automatically have to protect it. It's a really bad argument, It's not one we're going to win, because they'll just come back and say, well, that same document referencing also legalized slavery. And that same document referencing also didn't understand inflation. So it's a really bad argument to make. So I guess my thing is, don't start off with a weak argument to justify guns. We can make a natural argument, say that because this, and this, we need to have gun rights in this country, although I'm not personally a huge fan of that one. I think that the empirical argument is much stronger. We just can't really fall back on that from more of a pragmatic point of view.
Right. And I mean, it's kind of I'm not sure if it's the strictest definition of an a priori argument, but it's like one. It's, you're saying, well, it says this, almost like how you would in theology say, well, in this verse, in this, scripture, or in this book, it says X, Y, Z, as opposed to fleshing out the logic behind it. And that's sort of when people make these appeals to authority. I guess it's more of an appeal to authority, but you're making this kind of argument of like, well, the Constitution says this. All right, great. Now this, like you just said, this entire debate becomes a referendum on the Constitution, which was written, is it better than what it replaced? Well, no, because it replaced the Articles of Confederation. So no, it definitely is not. Is it better than the British Crown and being subject to a royal family? No. Or yes. Is it something that we should hang our hats on, especially when we're talking about freedom and liberty? No, probably not. So then what are your thoughts on this? Is something anytime I have people that like to flesh out philosophy on stuff, I like to ask them about this, because I'm not 100% on this either, which way I think. Natural rights. So the idea behind natural rights is that we are all imbued. And even if I was going to start with, by our Creator, even taking the religious argument out, by virtue of our existence, we have natural rights. So we own ourselves, therefore we own our labor and the product of our labor, which means that we own the property that we can accumulate with our labor, and we own our lives and our choices and things like that. And we can do what we want with those, provided we aren't harming someone else's property and rights and whatever. The argument is that it's a natural thing, and that when someone says, well, prove to me you have rights, they go, well, it's a natural thing. And yet in nature, we don't really see an argument in favor of rights being a thing. Animals trample all over each other's rights every day. Humans trample all over each other's rights every other day. So what is your thought? Because this is kind of an egoist argument, and I'm always all over the place on what I think of it. Have you really delved much into that? The underpinning of the idea of even having rights in the first place, or is that not something that really preoccupies you anyway because you're more focused on the data of what works and what doesn't?
No, I don't think it's a bad argument. I just don't think that it's really going to help us in political favors.
Right.
It's not that I don't believe in the non-aggression principle. I do. It's not that I don't believe in taxation and stuff. That I believe in that as well. But making both those arguments really hurts the libertarian movement, in my opinion. And Larry Sharp and I actually agreement on this. You talked about Larry Sharp earlier, saying that a lot of libertarians are talking about things that the general public is 20 years away from, where the public is not behind these really radical ideas. These arguments don't really further political discussion, and they certainly don't recruit people to become libertarians. That's why I stay away from those kind of phrases, because they're kind of a big turnoff for moderates and for political independents that are just being introduced to libertarianism. So
Right.
The natural rights argument kind of falls in that same category. It really goes from 1 to 100 very quickly, saying, well, because I was born with natural rights, therefore I should be able to, smoke cocaine, therefore there shouldn't be that I should have any gun I want, and therefore there shouldn't be child consent laws. It goes from 1 to 100 very, very quickly when making that
Right.
argument. Not
Yeah.
it's a bad argument. I don't think it is. I believe in natural rights for every American, but it's also a very weak one. So we can mention here and there and say that people should have the right to marry, or people should have the right to smoke marijuana or something like that. But it's really not a good empirical argument. It's not someone that's really going to win over the hearts and minds of people.
Oh yeah, it's certainly. I mean, again, like we were just talking about, when you talk about the Overton window or the 3x5, what is it? Tom Woods calls it the 3x5 flashcard of allowable opinion. So this is, what most people think, and we're so far over here, that it doesn't even register. And the more I read about the argument against the idea of rights and in favor of perceived self-interest, it's hard to even back that up as an actual philosophy, that the concept of rights. If rights were a thing, if they were a natural thing, why aren't we seeing them in nature? So it's a tough one. It's a useful construct to create boundaries, but it's not so much. We say it's this natural thing as though it is this palpable thing that exists. Like there are these lines that are drawn naturally, and they're not. So yeah, so again, anyone who is interested in the stuff that we're talking about, be sure to check out this book, Igniting Liberty. Now, you do a lot of other writing, and you recently wrote about, you wrote something for Being Libertarian that I was hoping that do you have a little bit more time?
Yeah, I have time.
Okay, cool. So I'd like to talk about something that you wrote for Being Libertarian, and it talked about the rise of artificial intelligence. It touched on the push for UBI, universal basic income, and your idea for what you call information capitalism. Talk to me about what you wrote.
Yeah, lots to unpack. Obviously, it's a really long article, but I can try to address several things.
Right.
It's a lot. So one big idea right now is that robotics and artificial intelligence are going to replace the entire workforce. That this idea that within 10, 15 years, we're going to go from a nation of only 4% unemployment rate to a nation where nobody without a doctor's degree has a job. That's the kind of idea that's being pushed by a lot of people. And of course, the first call to that is universal basic income. So people like Andrew Yang, who's running for president, and people like Robert, who is a liberal activist, have called for universal basic income. This idea that, and it comes off as somewhat Marxist, that the government should give $1,000 every single month to every single American just for existing. So just because I'm on this earth breathing, I got $1,000 check from the government, because it's going to be so necessary in the future, because everyone's going to be jobless, that we need just a small amount of sustainable income just so that we can get by. So I kind of addressed this idea at first. I'll get into informational capitalism later. This idea right here, 330 million people and throughout the United States, and $12,000 a year, is it costs us around $4 trillion. That $4 trillion is how much we currently spend on everything. So $4 trillion includes military, that includes healthcare, that includes education, that includes welfare, that includes interest payments. Everything we currently spend in the government is about $4 trillion. And we're obviously running a huge deficit as it is right now, and we're also $22 trillion in debt. And not only that, but our income tax receipts this past year were only $1.6 trillion. We cannot mathematically pay for another $4 trillion program. We can't mathematically pay for it. However, just take a step back for a moment and actually look at the argument of, will half of America be jobless in 10 years due to robotics and artificial information, that it doesn't really support that either. Certain industries will disappear, that's for sure.
Right.
I mean, we don't really have many elevator attendants and farmers and, gas pumpers anymore that we did 40, 50 years ago. Those
Right.
jobs, but they're replaced by other jobs as well. The World Economic Forum, this is actually not a study I cited in the actual paper I wrote itself, it said that in the next decade, about 133 million jobs will be created because of artificial intelligence, because of the advances in technology, but only 75 million will be displaced. And a lot of the studies that are basically support the idea that artificial intelligence and robotics will take over the American workforce are also really poorly constructed. There is a 2013 Oxford study that said that 47% of 47% of jobs will be at risk of being lost within the next 20 years due to artificial intelligence, robotics, and that taking over the workforce over real human capital.
Right.
The problem is, if you read the limitation section in that article, I have an exact quote right here. If you read the limitation section, it says, quote, the actual extent and pace of computerization will depend on several additional factors which were left unaccounted for. That is the exact quote from that exact study by Carl Benedict Frey and Michael A. Osborne. So
Okay.
these economists who obviously got together and said, this are the effects of that, never even try to put in the effort of counting for what jobs could be created because of the innovation in technology. So right now, the evidence saying that artificial intelligence robotics will take over the entire workforce to the point that will be all unemployed is shaky at the very best.
Yeah, I had shared with you that video because I was very much, as soon as I started hearing that, well, they're going to, the robots are coming to take all the jobs. And I'm like, this is the Luddite argument, episode 6 million. Like, it's once again, we're hearing people say that automation is going to take all of our jobs. And, they're not factoring in the greater efficiency and how it frees up more capital and how it creates new innovative things that we can't even think of. If you tried to explain, and I'll say this to people, if you try to explain what the average person would be doing for a living to someone 100 years ago, they wouldn't even understand the words you were saying. It's not even that they couldn't conceptualize what you were even talking about. They wouldn't even understand the phraseology you were using, because the society is so different than even 100 years ago, even 50 years ago, that it's truly the stuff of science fiction at the time. Asimov and things like that, they got pretty darn close, and even they couldn't fully understand what, for example, the internet would look like. They got things like air travel and flying cars and stuff that they could conceptualize in their time, but they couldn't get the internet because it was so, the idea of having instant access to the entire world's human knowledge at your fingertip on a mobile device that that comes with your phone plan, that doesn't, they couldn't even process something like that, or they had no basis to even begin to understand that. So I kind of fell back on saying, well, there's just going to be, our society is going to look so different than now that's what we'll be doing, and the robots will be freeing us up to do that. But I did see, and I had shared it with you, there's a video called Humans Need Not Apply. And it basically argued that artificial intelligence is rapidly reaching a point where it will be so much better at everything than us, and even art and songwriting and things like that there just won't be any jobs for us. My only argument against it, again, was that, or actually, I don't think I've told you this, but my argument whenever someone says, well, the robots are going to render us obsolete in every single way, is I say, if and when that happens and artificial AI makes us obsolete at all levels, I think it's also going to probably just end up realizing we're inefficient and unnecessary and just kill us all. So I hope and pray that you have a more optimistic argument about this than I do.
Mm-hmm.
So what would your...
I'm there.
No problem. So what would your argument be against what was on Humans Need Not Apply, that the robots are just going to take every possible thing that we could do as human beings?
Yeah, from a more conceptual standpoint, say that there's a historical argument to have. There's also a conceptual argument. I can kind of touch basis on both. On the conceptual argument, to say that there's a new technological innovation force. there's been new jobs basically created from three different avenues. First off, the tech companies and the innovative companies that create the new technology, say it's a self-flying plane, right? Let's go with that. So say places like Boeing that create the self-flying plane, well, they'll have to obviously create jobs because they need engineers, they need manufacturers, they need laborers to actually, physically put the plane together in one moment. They need,
Right.
perhaps people in the finance department to make sure the company still runs smoothly and everything like that. They need some accountants. Now, there's also two other avenues. Now, once the company, in this case, we'll go with Boeing because they produce airplanes, once they actually start seeing revenues and profits increase and things like that, there's essentially two different things that will come of that. And it's not just the company that makes these planes, it'll also become other companies that will benefit from this, maybe air travel agencies, things like that. Now, they usually do one of two things. Either from one perspective, they can lower the prices of air travel, maybe lower the prices of coach and first class, and instead of charging a few $100s to fly from LA to Chicago, Illinois, they might charge only like $50, $60. That's one route. The other route is that they're going to open up new locations, trying to expand their business throughout the globe. So obviously, if you expand your company, that in itself will create jobs. The second option is lower prices. If you lower prices, people have more spending money in their wallet. So if you spend half as much as you did previously to pay for a plane ticket from Los Angeles to Chicago, you'll have more money you can spend in other restaurants and other venues and other businesses. That money will circulate back into the workforce in other areas, and
Right.
that will allow those companies to hire people as well. So that's a conceptual argument, basically saying that no matter what happens, the money can move somewhere else, and the efficiency can take away from the workforce. The more historical argument is that we've seen great technological advancements in the past, since human history began. The cotton gin, that was created in the Deep South during the years of slavery before the 1860 Civil War.
Right.
That didn't just end slavery overnight. It just meant that the slaves were more efficient when picking cotton and actually selling on the open market. And we've seen other inventions as well that greatly increased efficiency and productivity in the workforce. We've seen great advancements in the Industrial Revolution. That was around the same time period, and into the early 1900s, when we saw that factories became much more efficient. We had steam-powered things, and cars were created, and we really didn't see a major negative impact on the workforce. The Industrial Revolution in 1910s, 1920s didn't really cause any horrible, shaking on employment.
Right.
So I guess historically that argument is untrue, and conceptually that argument has been proved untrue as well.
Fair enough. Yeah, it's. I see both arguments. I do not see an argument for universal basic income, a good one, because like you said, it's going to cost a fortune. Let's talk about the idea that you can live on $1,000 a month, and then also let's talk about the idea that you can live off $1,000 a month when the price of everything goes up, because when everyone is getting $12,000 a year right off the bat for not doing anything, they're just getting $1,000 a month right off the bat. What that does is it raises, and I'm telling the audience this more than you because you know this, that it just raises the price floor especially for basic goods and services. So okay, great, you have 12,000 more a year, and everything costs at least 12,000 more a year, especially the most basic things like groceries and basic insurance for your car and things like that. The things that the working poor also need. So that means that it will disproportionately harm the very people that it was supposedly helping in the first place. And it also, you want to talk about job losses, a country that whose government has this kind of a program in place, the tax burden that they would have to impose this kind of thing on people is going to just drive businesses. If we're envisioning this futuristic post-apocalyptic hellscape, or I guess not apocalyptic, but post-robotic hellscape where only the super rich who own all these robots are making any money and everyone else is just sitting there doing nothing because the robots have made them obsolete in every single field available. What makes you think they're going to stay in a high-tax country that gives money to all those people for not doing anything? They're, of course, going to go to places where they don't have to pay the taxes and that they pay as little as possible. So, there's multiple reasons why UBI is not a good idea. But like you said, I'm not. I can see the argument that I believe that robots, let's say 50 years from now, will be doing most of the stuff that we can even conceptualize a person doing.
Right.
But I also know, like you said, historically, it's going to be hard for me to conceptualize what people are doing 50 years from now. Just like if I went back to the 60s and told someone that I had, retired by age 35 because I sold my website design company, they'd say, what's a website? What does that even mean? And so fast forwarding 50 years from now, someone comes to me and goes, oh, that's okay. We're all just doing bleep bloops. And I'm like, great. I'm happy for you. I don't know what that is, but hopefully it's not called bleep bloop, but whatever it is, they'll be doing whatever that thing is in the future. So I'm glad that we, because I get a lot of people asking about that. I probably want to maybe have you on in the future to delve more into that, because I think there are an unsettlingly large number of libertarians who are advocating for UBI. Have you noticed that?
I actually have, but it wouldn't totally surprise me. I could see some self-declared libertarians claiming that, but I don't really know many. I only know how we can be libertarian and still claim that I guess here's the thing. If you're going to be a libertarian that opposes the Affordable Care Act or that opposes welfare, great. Those programs cost probably 1/10 to 1/20th the amount that UBI would cost. Right. I don't know how you can look at one and say that this costs too much, and then turn around and say, oh, let's go create a $4 trillion program. So maybe there's some self-described libertarians. Maybe there's some people that call themselves like libertarian socialists or something like that. But there's no one who has similar views to you and myself that actually has that belief.
Not a lot of capitalists. It's interesting though, because there are some that do it, and it's like you said. I'll say, yeah, okay, but you're against the welfare state, right? And they'll be like, yeah, the welfare state's terrible, and I'm like, this is welfare on steroids and speedballs and meth. Like it's
welfare state.
Yeah, it's like you said. It is an actual state of welfare. It is the state completely taking over your giving everyone money just for existing. That is the ultimate in the welfare state. And like you said, it's $4 trillion, and that was $4 trillion a year at $1,000 a month, right?
Right.
Okay. So for those watching at home, tell me, or no, don't tell me. Think to yourself what your average monthly cost of living is. Okay, and now whatever. So let's say if it's costing you $3,000 a month to live, that's 3 times the $1,000 a month. So now take that $4 trillion and multiply it by 3. Now it's a $12 trillion program. And then again, once you start factoring in inflation and the price floor being raised each time they do this, go ahead.
I was going to say population growth as well.
Oh, yeah, I didn't even think of that, because people are going to be, man, you're making free money, you're going to be having kids too. So, I mean, it's 4 trillion is the baseline beginning of what will easily become a 20, 30, 40 trillion dollar. I mean, you want to talk about debt bubbles now? I mean, it's absurd. So yeah, and again, that assumes everyone's still paying the tax revenue they are, and we know what happens when taxes go up, the revenue goes down because people are moving. So yeah, I like I said, my end game argument is that if we actually truly reach a point where there's nothing we can do, I think the robots are going to just start killing us. I think they're gonna. I hate to end on a positive note like that, but I think they'll be like, why are the robots here, or why are the humans here? Oh, because they have rights. What? No, we don't. We're robots. We don't believe in rights. So anyway, so thank you again for coming on. It was a blast, and I'm really glad you were able to fit me in. I hope to have you on again. Before we go, I want to give you a chance to tell us anything, talk about anything that we didn't get a chance to talk about on this show. Any upcoming stuff that you want to promote, any articles coming out, any new books coming out. Obviously, plug Igniting Liberty. Anything you want to talk about, Jake Dorsch, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to talk about, I guess. You'll see more articles from me in the future. I have a few that are the pipes already that I'm looking at publishing, not just at Being Libertarian LLC, but perhaps at other organizations as well. I will say this much, even though Igniting Liberty was my first book that I co-authored, I, of course, didn't write the entire thing. I wrote 4 chapters, and it kind of was a really good way to get my feet wet. This is not the end of me. Okay, I'm not going anywhere. I'm actually working on a few projects in the loop right now where I'm going to be looking at possibly writing an entire book by myself, perhaps with someone as a foreword and afterword. So I'm not going anywhere. Fastest way to reach me is just on Facebook. Just type in Jake Dorsch, Jake space Dorrsch. You'll see I post periodically, and you can just message me. I'll talk to anyone, even if you're a socialist, or even if you hate my guts, I'll gladly talk to you. And I'll talk about artificial intelligence. I'll talk about robots killing us off in the future as well.
That can be your book. That could be what your book can be about.
Right. It could be. I think there's always some movies about that too. There's Terminator. There's also iRobot. So not sure if that's necessary, but maybe in the future. So now let's plug in. Obviously, buy my book, Igniting Liberty on Amazon. It is #1 new release in military policy, the #1 new release in libertarianism, and the #1 new release in natural law perspectives. So make sure to buy a copy of Igniting Liberty. Be sure to follow me on Facebook. Be sure to follow my fellow Americans on Facebook as well. Make sure you keep in the loop with Spike Send, and that's all I really have.
I like that. From now on, I want my guests to counter plug me at the end too. That's a new requirement for all guests. If any future guests that are tuning in, that you have to now plug my show at the end too. So yeah, be sure to. What's that?
You're not doing your job. You have to be asking for that.
That's the thing. Like, I started off with it, and then I kind of trail off, and I want my guests to do well. So, but no, I appreciate it. But yeah, no, I definitely want to have you on in the future, guys. Jake Dorsch. This is, I wasn't being tongue in cheek when I said I think this is good. He's going to be a household name, especially in libertarian circles, very soon. Be sure to keep an eye on him, and we will definitely have you back, Jake. I hope you had fun.
Yeah, I did. Thank you so much.
Cool. And if you can just stick around, I want to talk to you a bit during the outro, but just stick around for a minute. Guys, thank you again for tuning in to this action-packed episode of My Fellow Americans. Check us out tomorrow night on the Writer's Block, where Matt is interviewing Daniel Berman, who is running for the Libertarian Party nomination for president in 2020. Check out on Friday the completely blanked. Jason Lyon on Mr. America, The Bearded Truth. He is wrapping up the week with his show, where he'll be kind of giving his thoughts on the things that have happened the past few days. Have a great weekend, and then come back for Monday, where we will be starting the week, as we always do, with Mr. America again with Jason Lyon. And then check us out on Tuesday night for the Muddy Waters of Freedom. That'll be me and Matt Wright as we parse through the week's events as we see them. And then next week on My Fellow Americans, I will be interviewing the people behind the new documentary that's going to be coming up, Living in Liberty. So be sure to check that out. My old friend Joshy Bear Smith. So guys, thanks again for tuning in. We will see you again very soon, and God bless you.
They say about an eye for an eye in a time when the blind lead the blind. Who am I to deny when cry when a loved one dies? I recognize that body outside with the holes in the body that was alive. Now can't find it with chalk outline. Find out how, but you never know why. It ain't even make it to the news at 9. It ain't even make it to the news at 9. That's my sister, mother, father, brother, son. That's one of